Take a second, close your eyes, picture the fruit of the Loom logo, a bunch of grapes, an apple, some leaves, and behind the fruit, a cornucopia, a horn of plenty. You see it? Good, hold on to that. There has never been a cornucopia in this logo. Not in 1893, when the logo was first registered. Not in any official version across more than 130 years. The company has stated this directly, and yet millions of people around the world remember it as clearly as if they saw it yesterday. Pikachu has never had a black tip on his tail. The Monopoly Man has never had a monocle. The bears in those children's books are called Berenstain, with an A, not Berenstein. Darth Vader never said, "Luke, I am your father." And that's just the start. And Nelson Mandela did not die in prison in the 1980s. In 1990, he walked free. In 1994, he became president of South Africa. He died at home, surrounded by his family, in 2013. But a huge number of people remember, vividly, in detail, his funeral 30 years earlier. That memory is what gave this phenomenon its name. Today, real cases, real experiments, the real explanation, and the questions science still hasn't fully answered. (2010) Atlanta. At the DragonCon convention, an American paranormal researcher and consultant named Fiona Broome is talking to another attendee about Nelson Mandela. Both are certain Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. Both remember the funeral coverage, the widow's speech, the riots that followed across South Africa. Then it turns out Mandela is alive. The year is 2010, he's 92. Broome goes home and writes about it on her blog, and finds something strange. Dozens, then hundreds of strangers write back saying they remember the same thing. Not one or two cranks. Unrelated people across the world holding the same vivid false memory. Broome coins a name for it, the Mandela effect. The name sticks. Mandela's real biography is well documented. Arrested in 1962, 27 years in prison, mostly on Robben Island. Walked out a free man on February 11, 1990, broadcast live around the world. Nobel Peace Prize, 1993. President of South Africa, 1994. Died December 5, 2013, in Johannesburg. There was no funeral in the 1980s. There never was. On its own, this could have stayed a curiosity on one blog, but the effect turned out to be much wider than just Mandela, and much older than 2010. The most cited example, a children's book and cartoon series about a family of bears. The authors were Stan and Jan Berenstain. If you grew up with these books, you almost certainly remember the name as Berenstein, with an E. The actual name is Berenstain, with an A. That's how the family spelled their own surname. The covers always had an A. The authors confirmed it in interviews, and yet, in surveys, the percentage of people who remember E is consistently above half. Star Wars, 1980, a scene watched by hundreds of millions. Darth Vader says, literally, word for word, "No, I am your father." No, Luke. That scene has been parodied for 45 years, almost always as Luke, I am your father. The parody has settled deeper into memory than the original. 1937, Disney. Snow White. The Queen approaches her mirror and says, "Magic mirror on the wall." Not mirror, mirror. Decades of retellings and translations have cemented in pop culture a line the film never contains. The Monopoly Man, famous mascot in a top hat, with a mustache and a cane. If you tried to draw him from memory, you'd probably add a monocle. There is no monocle. There never was. Hasbro has confirmed it dozens of times. The brain seems to be confusing him with another Victorian-style gentleman, Mr. Peanut, the Planters Peanut mascot. He really does have a monocle. Pikachu. Black ears, red cheeks, lightning bolt yellow tail, and, as many people are convinced, a black tip on the end of the tail. There is no black tip. There has never been a black tip. Not in a single frame of the anime, not in any game, not on any card. Edvard Munch's The Scream. 4 authentic versions exist. If you asked 100 people to draw it from memory, many would put the figure's hands over its mouth, which narratively is reasonable. The figure is screaming, but the hands are on its cheeks. By the temples, not covering the mouth, in any of the 4 versions. The list could go on, and the key point is not a lot of people get this wrong. The key point is, a lot of unrelated people get it wrong in exactly the same way. That's the question worth bringing to science. The first thing to understand about memory, it does not work like a video recorder. That's the intuitive model, and it's wrong. We don't record an event and then play it back. Every time we remember something, the brain reassembles the memory from fragments, expectations, and context. Every memory is a reconstruction, and every reconstruction differs slightly from the last one. The Cambridge psychologist Frederick Bartlett knew this back in 1932. In his book, Remembering, he had British subjects read a Native American folk tale called The War of the Ghosts, full of imagery and logic foreign to them. Then he asked them to retell it after hours, days, weeks. With each retelling, the story drifted. Unfamiliar details dropped out. Strange images were replaced with familiar ones. Memory was bending the story to fit pre-existing mental templates. Bartlett gave those templates a name, schemas. In the 1970s, the American psychologist Elizabeth Loftus showed how fragile memory really is in practice. In her now classic experiments, subjects watched footage of a car accident. Then they were asked questions. One group, how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other? Another group, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? One word, smashed instead of contacted, and the speed estimate jumped. A week later, the same group was more likely to remember broken glass that wasn't in the footage. Loftus had proven it. A single verb can rewrite a memory. 1995, Loftus and her student Jacqueline Pickrell run an experiment that becomes a textbook reference. Subjects are told 4 stories from their childhood. 3 are true, sourced from family. The 4th is entirely invented, that they got lost in a shopping mall at age 5. Across several sessions, around a quarter of subjects don't just remember this event, they add details. The color of a jacket, who found them, what they felt. The event never happened. The memory is there, full, emotional, indistinguishable from the real ones. This isn't pathology. This is normal memory functioning normally in everyone. In you, in me, in the CNN anchor, in a Nobel laureate. Memory isn't lying to us out of malice. It just works very differently from how it feels. The first mechanism, schema-driven completion, filling in by template. If a logo contains fruit and leaves, the brain files it under still life. And the schema for fruit still life historically includes a cornucopia. The brain sees empty space behind the grapes and helpfully fills it with what should be there, not what is. Second mechanism, source confusion. Memory stores the fact top-hatted gentleman with a monocle, but it stores poorly which one. Mr. Peanut, mascot of Planters Peanuts, has actually worn a monocle since 1916. Memory transfer, a detail from one image migrates to a similar one. The Monopoly man inherits someone else's monocle. Third mechanism, the most powerful one in a mass media age. Social reinforcement. If you've seen the actual scene from Star Wars once in your life and you've seen parodies of it 200 times, the original doesn't win. The averaged simplified version wins. Luke, I am your father. Shorter, clearer, easier on a viewer who never saw the full sentence in context. Each parody makes it slightly more real in collective memory. At some point, it becomes real, for the majority. 1996, Dutch psychologists Krombag, Wagenaar and Van Koppen run an experiment. They ask people whether they had seen TV footage of a cargo plane crashing into an apartment block in Amsterdam 4 years earlier. Over 55% answer yes. Many add details, the angle of impact, the speed, whether the fire started immediately or later. There was no footage of the moment of impact. None ever existed. It was never broadcast because it didn't exist. Half the people surveyed remembered something that physically does not exist. Stack these 3 mechanisms, schema completion, source confusion, social reinforcement, and you get exactly the effect Fiona Broome named the Mandela effect. Until 2022, the Mandela effect had largely stayed in the territory of pop science articles, not academic journals. That changed when 2 researchers at the University of Chicago, Deepasri Prasad and Wilma Bainbridge, published a paper titled directly, "The Visual Mandela Effect as Evidence for Shared and Specific False Memories Across People." They drew a careful line between a real, replicable phenomenon and the paranormal interpretations. Their methodology was simple and powerful. Take well-known images that have already accumulated reports of collective error. Make several variants, one real, several altered. Ask subjects to pick the real one. Then measure, on which images do the errors converge? Not scatter randomly, converge, where the majority gets it wrong in the same way. The result confirmed something obvious from life, but not yet established theoretically. For most images, errors scatter chaotically. One person mistakes one element, another person mistakes another. But for a small subset of images, Pikachu, the Monopoly Man, the Volkswagen logo, the Curious George illustration, the errors converge on a single point. Everyone gets it wrong the same way. That can't be explained by random poor memory in one person. That's a systemic property of visual memory itself. Prasad and Bainbridge gave it a name: the Visual Mandela Effect, or VME. On Reddit, there's a community called RR Mandela Effect. Hundreds of thousands of members, tens of thousands of threads. On YouTube, there are channels devoted entirely to this topic, with millions of views per video. Before 2010, no such space existed. Not because people didn't make these errors before, because they had nowhere to compare. There's a simple statistical effect here. Every person carries some false memories about pop culture. In the past, those errors stayed inside one head, or at most inside one family. Today, anyone who thinks Pikachu had a black tail tip can find a million strangers who agree within 5 seconds. The effect didn't appear in the internet era. It became visible in the internet era. But the internet doesn't only display the effect, it also amplifies it. There's a name for this: memory conformity. In paired subject lab experiments, one confident assertion from a partner is enough to make a subject remember the same false fact. Social media turns this lab phenomenon into an everyday one. Every "do you remember this too?" post is a small experiment in implanted memory, run on millions of people at once. This doesn't mean every report of the Mandela effect is the internet's fault. It means the internet has turned a quiet curiosity into a loud mass phenomenon. The Mandela effect has its own stable set of alternative explanations. Parallel universes, simulation glitches, timeline shifts, a corporate conspiracy quietly rewriting logos. Let's go through them honestly. Parallel universes. This isn't just science fiction, it's a real interpretation of quantum mechanics. Everett's Many Worlds interpretation, 1957. But in that interpretation, parallel universes do not communicate with each other. At all. The transfer of memories between them is physically not part of the theory. Citing quantum physics to explain the Mandela effect is citing a physics that explicitly says no such effect can exist. Corporate conspiracy. The idea that companies quietly changed their logos and erased the old versions. This is easy to check. Packaging archives, ad poster archives, TV commercial archives are kept in museums, libraries, and private collections all over the world. The fruit of the Loom logo from 1953 looks the same as the one today. No cornucopia. To rewrite every physical artifact across 130 years and every country, you'd need a level of coordination no corporation in history has ever achieved. Any mystical theory has to explain 3 things. Why the errors converge on one point, instead of scattering. Why specifically on images with strong visual schemas, and why the same errors reproduce in lab experiments, where no reality shifts are happening. Cognitive science explains all 3. Parallel universes explain none of them. The biggest open question is why these images and not others. Pikachu falls into the Mandela effect. Mickey Mouse almost not at all. The Volkswagen logo does. The Apple logo doesn't. In their 2022 paper, Prasad and Bainbridge are honest about it. They confirmed the effect exists, but did not build a predictive model. We can't yet tell in advance which image is vulnerable and which isn't. It's an active area of research. Second open question, quantitative. Does the internet amplify the phenomenon itself, or only make it visible. Those are different hypotheses, and they make different predictions. If only visibility, the rate of errors per individual shouldn't be changing. If amplification, it should be rising. There isn't enough longitudinal data yet to say for sure. Third question, where the line is. If I alone remember something wrong, that's a memory error. If a million people remember it wrong the same way, that's the Mandela effect. But what about 10,000, 100? Where's the threshold? The effect doesn't have a strict definitional boundary yet. That doesn't make it less real, but it does make its edges fuzzy. Most of the phenomenon is explained, some of it isn't. And there's nothing alarming about that. That's what honest science looks like. Not everything is solved, but this part is solved, and we're still working on this part. The most practical takeaway is about eyewitness testimony. Loftus has given expert testimony in dozens of criminal cases. Based on her work, the Innocence Project in the United States has helped overturn more than 200 convictions where the central evidence was a confident eyewitness account. Confidence is not the same as accuracy. That may be the single most important lesson of this entire topic. A quieter but no less important takeaway is about your own personal memory. The stories you tell about your own childhood are half reconstruction. Not because you're lying, because that's how memory works. This isn't a reason to distrust yourself, it's a reason to know your limits. And one more takeaway, about collective memory in the age of the feed. If a small group of people repeats the same thing confidently, your memory will warp toward their version. That's not just how the Mandela effect works, that's how mass disinformation works. Knowing the mechanism is the only defense. What's settled? The Mandela effect is a real, replicable phenomenon. It's explained by three mechanisms of ordinary memory: schema completion, source confusion, and social reinforcement. What's being studied? Why specifically these images and not others? What remains open? The precise quantitative dynamics of the effect in the internet age. Parallel universes, timeline shifts, and corporate conspiracies are not on this list. The Mandela effect isn't a story about reality breaking. It's a story about how we are built. Memory isn't an archive, it's a process. And sometimes thousands of separate processes in thousands of separate heads converge on the same point. That's the most striking thing about this whole topic, and the most human. One term, dozens of cases, three mechanisms of memory, two labs that turned this into science, and one practical conclusion. What you remember confidently isn't always what happened. This isn't about your memory, it's about memory itself.